Well, good morning, church friends and family. It's good to be here. I see we have a lot of guests and visitors. If you're a first-timer, thank you for being here this morning. We're so glad to have you. Thank you for joining us in worship and in praise. It's good to be together. If you're joining us online or listening on the radio, thank you as well for being a part of our time of worship. I will admit, in many ways, I am a pretty lousy Texan. Even though I have lived in Texas for the last 26 years, Houston, Lubbock, Stephenville, Beaumont, Lubbock again, and now here, there's still much of my Louisiana blood that just won't wash out. For my 30th birthday, Jenna planned a trip for us to visit the Hill Country. Until then, I had no idea that this part of the state even existed, let alone appreciated its incredible beauty. I still have not made it far west enough to see Big Bend, and only last summer did I discover the national seashore to our south. And I'm very certain that no matter how long I live here, I will never cheer for the Cowboys. But I have become a pretty diehard Spurs fan. You see, what happened was when I moved to Texas as a boy, I missed that year of schooling where you do Texas history. When we went to the Philippines a couple years ago, Alex preached using the Alamo as an example of our call to stand firm as Christians and to proudly remember the sacrifices of our Savior. Up until that point, I don't think I had ever really heard that story before. It was inspiring and profound. And just a few weeks ago, Graham and I got to go see the Alamo on a school field trip. We get to visit that hallowed ground. It was a beautiful day. It was really nice. But I learned a lot on that trip, received a newfound respect for everything that happened there. And there was one exhibit in particular that really held my attention for a long time. It was this massive model of the entire property as it once was, which was way bigger than I realized. And then above this model, there were little lights on the ceiling that shone down on different locations within the fort that described, and there was a voice over the speaker that described the different purposes of these different locations during the battle. It highlighted where the troops first advanced and where different defenses had been set up all around the fortress. But it kept referencing, the recording that was playing, kept referencing one location on the map that I couldn't find. They called it the Alamo Church. And I looked all over and I was like, oh, there's no church here. As embarrassing as it is to admit, I did not know that this main iconic building was a church. I did not know that the Alamo, that symbol of San Antonio and Texas history, had once functioned as a church building, as a house of worship. I'm sure you all knew that, but I didn't. That was news to me. And so it's fascinating to learn that this structure had once functioned as a place of prayer. And I walked through admiring all the faded frescoes that are still kind of visible on the walls and reading all the signs that memorialize the fallen heroes of the battle. And I felt a sort of heavy sorrow about that. That this building that was once a beautiful church had once been peppered with bullets, that it was filled with smoke and tears and injured soldiers and been blown apart by cannonballs. And for a moment, it felt wrong. It's a tragedy to have such a beautiful place that was intended to bring glory to the Lord, a place where the lost were invited to come home, a place that served as a place of knowledge and wisdom and truth and learning, is now in the heat of battle, a house of violence and death. And so I'm standing there by this model, listening to these words spoken over the speaker, fascinated by everything that I'm learning and trying to absorb all that I could, finally identifying which building was the church. And the recording said something that I had not considered. It said that during the battle, the Alamo Church was used as a sanctuary, a place of safekeeping for women and children and non-combatants. It was the last stronghold Had cannons poking out through the doors, and it was the final area to fall. And while I still think it's heartbreaking to imagine all of that going on within this house of peace, I guess in a way it's fitting. The Alamo Church didn't even have a roof. It didn't even have all of its walls, but all the same, it was a place of protection, a refuge for the vulnerable and the hurting, a place of hope for those in need. And in a way, that's a lot of what the church is always supposed to be. So as we continue working through Paul's aspects of godly love that we see in 1 Corinthians 13, as we look at that list, it's easy to see how all of these qualities kind of build on one another. They are masterfully intertwined, one just as important as the next, all depending on each other to create a complete picture of love as God sees it. You take out one and the whole thing collapses. Without patience and kindness, our love loses its warmth and its authenticity. But you add in envy and boasting, and love becomes competitive. When love keeps record of wrongs, it stops being love and turns into a ledger of debts. You have to have it all, or the devil will find some crack to worm his way in and corrupt the whole thing. And so we definitely see that happening today as one builds on the next. Today's attribute of godly love is an interesting one. They all are, but this is one that I had not really fully considered before, and the original wording here paints actually a pretty unique picture. 1 Corinthians 13:7, love bears all things. Or as the NIV translates it, love always protects. Now, the Greek word that's used here is the word stego, which very simply just means roof, as in the covering, the roof over a house, the covering that keeps out rain and wind and shades the inhabitants during the day. And so as we work through this part of love, I want you to keep that image in mind. Love acts as a roof, a protection over the people within. But you dig a little bit deeper into that verb form of this word, and it gets more specific. One lexicon defines it this way: to cover over with silence. William Barclay writes, "It is just possible that this may mean love can cover anything, in the sense that it will never drag into the light of day the faults and mistakes of others. It would far rather set about quietly mending things than publicly displaying and rebuking them." Many other commentators agree that this love that Paul is describing here is a love that covers with silence. It accomplishes protection of the vulnerable quietly rather than loudly, and it knows that those who are weakened need a shield and a refuge. They need that sanctuary, a safe place to go in the heat of battle, and defenders who are willing to stand at the door and guard in the meantime. I rolled a four-wheeler one time, but thankfully I have never been in a car crash. And it amazes me when I'm driving along and I pass by an accident and see a vehicle that is just utterly destroyed. Mangled metal, deployed and deflated airbags, shattered glass sparkling on the pavement, and yet the passengers are standing on the outside. They're shaken for sure, but they're able to walk away. Now, I know that is not always the case, but when it is, it's because a lot of attention and engineering went into that car so that it will brake in just the right way. I mean, the car is totaled. It is never going to drive again. But in some ways, that is exactly what it was designed to do. And when it works just right, it protects the lives inside. Even though it takes the damage, it crumples and it bends in just the right way so that the people are preserved. It takes the hit so that the people don't. And I think that's the kind of love that we're talking about here. Godly love takes the hit. It's the shield. It's the protection around the fragile and the vulnerable. And as Jim read for us just a moment ago in John chapter 15, Christ says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." This is no light command. Jesus calls us to love one another. But the command as it stood before was love your neighbor as yourself. And this is a greater command even than that. Jesus often instructs us to rise up to a higher level than the minimum. And here he sets a new standard. Love as I have loved you, and there is no greater love than this, to lay down your life for another. Now, at this point in John's gospel, the Messiah has not yet gone to the cross, but he soon will. And this expression of his love will become even clearer when he does go to the cross. It's a sign of the lengths that he would go to for love. If Jesus' love could be quantified, this is how much he loves. So much so that he would give his own life. He would use his own body, his own flesh and blood to protect, to shield his beloved from all the flaming arrows of death. He takes the hit. He lays himself down as a covering over the vulnerable and the fragile. His love bore it all on the cross. And then he tells you and me, his followers, his disciples, to go and do the same. This is no light command. Because the hard truth is that the protective love that we're talking about here, as a protector, you will probably not walk away unscarred. Every parent in here knows this. You stand as a shield between your child and all the things of this world that threaten to harm your kid. Whether that's all the temptations of this life that you so desperately try to protect them from, or even maybe the desires that are within them, that they fight against you to go get. They want you to get out of the way so that they can have it. All the while you know that it is not for their own good. There's a great parenting book out there titled Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. It's aptly named, and it's a great read. Or Paul writes to husbands, Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. Yes, there are times when this kind of love is returned by wives to their husbands, but husbands have this direct, specific sacrificial calling to love their wives as protectors and sanctuaries around them. If challenged, if the choice has to be made, who's going to take the hit here? Husbands are to give themselves up for their wives, just as Christ did for his bride, the church. And that doesn't only mean literally as in physical danger or harm, but in every other way as well. A Christ-like husband prioritizes his wife's well-being above his own, her wellness before his. And we like to think of leadership as decision-making, and that's certainly part of that here, but let us not neglect the sacrifice of making decisions in her favor before our own. And a wife responds by respecting a man who loves her in this way. There's an interesting character from Scripture who comes to mind, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, Judah. He's not the oldest. He does not come from Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. He should not be one of the sons that gets a whole lot of attention, and yet his name appears in Scripture over and over, especially a few very critical places. And Judah is a mess. When his brothers finally have had enough of the favored son, Joseph, they all conspire together to kill him and let some wild animals take the blame. In that moment, it's Reuben, who is the eldest. He steps in and he rescues Joseph from death. But they still decide to throw him in a pit because it's a temporary solution to all the annoyance. So they all sit down together to have lunch, and just then a caravan of Ishmaelite traders happens to pass by, and it's Judah who suggests, maybe we can make a little cash by selling him as a slave. 2 birds with 1 stone, right? You make some money while ridding yourself of this annoying favored sibling. That seems like a good plan until they realize the pain that they have caused their father. Genesis 37:34. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth over his loins and mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol with my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. And you go on to the next chapter, and the next chapter is all about Judah. I'll spare you the details because it's real messy, but the long and short of it is Judah has twin sons with a woman named Tamar, a woman that he had no place being in this sort of situation with. All that we have seen of Judah up to this point is that he is not the hero. He's not a good guy. He has not been the protector or the shield that he is supposed to be. He is not that roof that goes over the vulnerable and not a fortress around the fragile. But in time, we see something change in him. So you fast forward in the story, Joseph is now all grown up, and he is a man of great power and influence in Egypt. His brothers come to find him seeking food during a famine, but they do not yet know that he's their brother. And so he has this little test that he runs to see if anything's changed in their character. He takes his silver cup, or he has his silver cup taken and hidden in the bag of his brother, his only full brother, Benjamin. And when it's discovered what Benjamin has allegedly done, he's in big trouble and the brothers are in a lot of distress. But who is it that comes to his rescue but unlikely Judah? And he tells Joseph this story of his father's loss and his heartbreak. He tells of Jacob's great love for Benjamin and how his grief will only multiply if he loses this son as well. And he tells him how he has already pledged his own life that Benjamin would return home safely. And he says, Genesis 44:33, "Now therefore, please let your servant," talking about himself, "remain here instead of the boy Benjamin as a servant to my Lord. Let the boy go back with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father." Now that is protective love. Benjamin's alleged theft is not Judah's fault, and the consequences are not his to bear. Jacob's sorrow would also not have been Judah's fault either. But he uses himself as a shield around his brother and around his dad, offering himself up as one who protects those that he loves. And we see this transformation in Judah, a sincere change of heart. No, he has not always been the good, godly man that he was supposed to be, but he makes the decision in this moment to be a sanctuary and to take the hit on someone else's behalf. It's only fitting then that many, many generations later, Judah's name appears again in a very sacred place in Scripture. In Matthew chapter 1, the genealogy of Jesus. Christ does not come through Reuben the eldest or Joseph the favored, but through Judah, the protector, the transformed, and the redeemed. And it's no small detail that of the very few women named in the genealogy, it's Tamar who mothers the connection between Judah and Jesus. In a very imperfect way, Judah serves as a symbol of Christ's love for us. Very flawed, of course, but he becomes the one who would lay down his life to save someone else. And then that's a role that we are all called to, because love bears all things. And sometimes that means that we have to take the hit for someone else. We sacrifice ourselves. We lay down our lives for those who are in need. We set aside what we want and sometimes what we need in service to those who are hurting, so that they do not become desperate. I love that line that Judah says. He says, "I fear to see the evil that would find my father." And that's what's at stake here. Evil will relentlessly beat down those who are already low. The enemy devours easy prey, and he can smell them from a mile away. And so protective love defends valiantly, even at great costs to themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that defenders allow themselves to be devoured in the process. Paul warns in Galatians 6, "Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. but keep watch of yourself, lest you be tempted too. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Jesus, law of Christ. Being a guard at the gate does mean that you will likely endure some injury yourself, and that's a noble cause. But keep watch, because the enemy sees you too, and he will not give you a pass just because you're doing a nice thing. If anything, it usually puts a larger target on you. I'm sorry to say that, but that's the truth. Ask any one of the elders here who shepherd over this flock. The wolves come for them double sometimes. And that's part of the weight that they volunteer to carry. And it's very honorable, but it's hard. So the Hebrew writer says, Hebrews 13:17, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. And let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you. So whether it's the actual physical building where we gather, or the family of believers that gathers together wherever, the church has always acted as a sanctuary, a covering, a refuge, a shield, a roof over the head of the vulnerable. Now, like the Alamo, the church is to be a safe place for the disarmed, a defense for the defenseless. We identify the weak, and at times we lay down ourselves on top of them as a shield, taking the damage on ourselves when they cannot endure it in that moment. Years ago, I was helping out with a youth summer camp in New Mexico. Beautiful place up in the mountains, pine trees everywhere. And each day during camp, people would go out on hikes through the pine trees and delight in the beauty of God's creation. One day in particular, we decided to split up the kids into two groups. We had a younger group that was going to go and take an easier, lower elevation hike, and then a harder hike with the older kids up to the top of this mountain. I went with the older kids. And while on top, one of the sponsors' backpack started making this loud, wailing, obnoxious, siren-y sound. And it was his lightning detector. And being on top of a mountain, surrounded by tall trees, is not a good place to be in a lightning storm. So he instructed us to book it down the mountain fast as we could and go back to camp, which we did. And we ran fast and furious through the mud and now pouring rain. And honestly, it was a blast. We had a lot of fun. We're laughing and running and just playing in the storm. However, the younger kid hike was not so lucky. So the rain hit them without warning. And they did not return to camp smiling, as we did, but with tears in their eyes, but with a really inspiring story to tell. See, the younger kids, who were already much more prone to fear, also got hit with a healthy dose of hail. And sometimes you can run, and sometimes you just have to hunker down and wait for it to pass. And that's what they did. They rode it out. So the counselors got the kids together, grouped around a couple of the trees, which, again, is not a good idea on the lightning, but it all worked out okay. And then the counselors huddled around them and leaned over them, and they took the hail beating on their own backs until it stopped. Now, everyone returned soaking wet, but it was only the counselors who wore the bruises. And that's what we're talking about this morning. Love bears all things. And sometimes it's just what you got to do. You take the hail, you take the blame, you take the burden, you carry the weight, you fight off the wolves, because nobody has the strength to do it all the time. We are all the vulnerable at some point. All have seasons of weakness, and therein lies the beauty of the gospel of Jesus. 2 Corinthians 5:21, for our sake he made him to be sin, who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus, the blameless, took the blame for those who would not have survived if he hadn't. And that's love. That's the love that says, and then he says, now go and do it. Love one another as I have loved you. And it's hard. It is not the warm, fuzzy Valentine's kind of love. That is a love that saves the world and sets free the captive. If there's anything this church family can do for you this morning, if you're in need of prayer, you're in need of companionship, maybe this morning you're in need of covering, and this church can be that for you. Maybe this morning you're ready to put on Christ and start a whole new walk with him through baptism. However we can help you, some of our elders will be up front or in the back as we stand and sing.